Ready to dive into some really heady stuff? We're talking about a question that's been pondered for like forever, but has taken on this whole new urgency lately, and that is, can machines think?
It's the question, isn't it?
It is. And we asked you to send in source material for this deep dive, and you guys did not disappoint. We got excerpts from Alan Turing's 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, which, let's be real, this thing is basically the birth certificate of AI.
It's true, yeah.
So we're going all the way back to 1950, to the dawn of the computer age. Picture those room-sized behemoths with, like, punch cards and vacuum tubes.
Oh, I can practically hear the whirring.
Right. Not exactly the image that comes to mind when you think thinking machine. So what was Turing up to? What made him think these clunky contraptions held the potential for, well, thought itself?
Well, I think it's important to remember that back in 1950, defining thinking was like, I don't know, herding cats. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them were particularly testable. So Turing, being the genius he was, found a way around that. He gave us a game.
The imitation game, right, which we now know as the Turing test.
Exactly.
And it's such a simple concept, yet so mind-blowingly clever. Okay, everyone listening, imagine this. You've got 3 rooms, each with a person and a typewriter.
Okay, I'm picturing...
In one room, a man, another room, a woman, and in the third room, our judge, our interrogator.
And they could only communicate through typed messages, right?
You got it. No voices, no peeking through keyholes, just words on a page. The judge's job. Figure out who's the woman just by having a conversation.
I can already see where this is going.
Oh, yeah. Now, swap out one of the humans with a computer.
And suddenly we're not debating what thinking means. We're looking at whether we can detect it.
Boom. You just nailed it. Turing shifted the entire conversation. It's no longer about what's going on inside the machine, the internal stuff we can't see. It's about behavior, about whether a machine can act so human-like that it can fool us.
And that was a radical idea. It cut through all the philosophical jargon and gave us a concrete way to test for something that had always seemed intangible.
Totally. And this is where it gets really interesting, because Turing wasn't naive. He knew the computers of his day, those giant calculators, were nowhere near passing this test. But he specifically called out digital computers as the future contenders. So why focus on them? What did Turing see in those early machines that made him think they held the key to artificial intelligence?
Because Turing, he was able to look past the limitations of the technology at the time. He wasn't focused on the hardware. He was focused on the potential of software, the potential of programming.
So he was thinking about the code, the instructions that would tell these machines what to do, even if those instructions were pretty basic back then.
Exactly. He described a digital computer as having a store, which is essentially what we call memory today. It also has an executive unit to process those instructions, kind of like the machine's brain doing the actual calculations. And then there's control, which manages the flow of information, making sure everything runs smoothly.
It's kind of funny, right? We're using these terms like store and executive unit when we have smartphones in our pockets that can do like a million things at once. But those simple components that Turing described, those were the building blocks for everything that came after.
He was laying the groundwork for the future of computing, even though the technology of his time was still incredibly primitive. And here's the thing. Turing didn't just describe this future. He made a prediction about it. He believed that within 50 years, a machine would be able to play his imitation game convincingly enough to fool a human judge.
Okay, now that's a bold prediction. So did he nail it? Did humanity manage to create a thinking machine by Turing's deadline?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Did Turing's prediction actually come true? I mean, it's 2024, so we're well past his deadline.
We are.
And we've got computers that can, do math at speeds we can't even comprehend. AI is composing music, even beating us at our own games, like chess. So did Turing's prediction...
Did he overshoot a little? It's a good question, Round. I mean, you'd think if we plopped Alan Turing down in like a modern AI lab today, he'd be like, I was right.
Right.
But then you've got Siri and Alexa who still can't seem to tell you if you need an umbrella without sounding like, well, a robot.
Exactly. And Turing knew this whole thinking machine thing wouldn't be easy. In fact, he actually spends a big chunk of his paper tackling all the counter-arguments he knew people would throw his way.
He was like preempting those angry internet comments before the internet even existed. So what were people freaking out about? Give me like the greatest hits of objections to Turing's ideas.
Okay, well, he starts with the big one, the theological objection.
Okay.
Which is the idea that, thinking that's God's gift to humans, It's not something a machine can just do.
Which is kind of a curveball argument for a mathematician to be addressing, don't you think?
You'd think so, yeah.
So how did Turing respond to that one? Did he get out his protractor and compass and start, like, drawing diagrams to argue with divine intervention?
Not quite. His response is actually kind of funny. He basically says limiting God's power to only create intelligence in humans is kind of, well, limiting God.
Oh, I see, I see.
Maybe creating thinking machines is part of God's plan. He kind of turns the argument on its head.
I love that. I love that he's like the original philosophical hacker.
Right.
But I'm guessing not everyone was ready to sign up for AI church just yet.
No, definitely not. He then goes on to address this other objection, which he calls the heads in the sand objection.
The heads in this.
And honestly, it's something we still see a lot today.
Okay.
This idea that, like, oh, the consequences of machines actually thinking are just too scary to even consider, so we should just pretend it's not possible.
Oh, so that whole, like, robots are going to turn us all into paper clips, anxiety, it all starts with Turing.
Exactly. But Turing wasn't having it. He thought this fear-based denial was totally unproductive. Instead of burying our heads in the sand, we should be exploring both the positive and negative possibilities of intelligent machines.
Which I think is a really good point. You can't solve problems by ignoring them. So Turing's taken on God. He's taken on existential dread. What else do those poor 1950s folks have to worry about?
Well, then you have the mathematical objection.
Okay.
And this one's a bit complicated, but essentially it boils down to the idea that there are limits to what logic and mathematics can actually prove. And since computers are basically just really fancy calculators, they're always going to hit those limits.
Hold on. We're going to need to unpack this one a bit because this mathematical objection, this goes back to something called Gödel's incompleteness theorems, right?
You got it.
And now this theorem is notoriously mind-bending, so I'm just going to put it out there for our listeners. If this one makes your brain hurt a little, you're in good company.
Absolutely. It's a tough one.
All right, so what is Gödel's incompleteness theorem all about in, like, the simplest, most elegant nutshell you can give me?
Okay, so basically it says, even in the most, like, airtight, perfect system of logic, there are going to be some true statements that you just can't prove within that system. It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It's just not going to happen.
So some truths are they're just unprovable, even for, like, a supercomputer.
Exactly. And because Turing saw digital computers as operating on these formal systems, some critics argued that this meant there would always be a ceiling to what they could actually figure out.
Okay, so that's a pretty strong counter-argument. How did Turing bat that one back?
Well, he basically said just because a single machine might be limited by how it's programmed, it doesn't mean that all machines, or even us humans, are subject to those same limitations. He imagined this sort of arms race of intelligence. So humans invent smarter machines, which then leads to even smarter machines, and so on.
It's like that old saying, build a better mousetrap, and you just get smarter mice. Turing really was thinking way ahead of his time, but I have a feeling not everyone was convinced by his arguments.
Right. Okay, so we've got Turing going toe-to-toe with theologians, philosophers, even mathematicians.
Right.
You'd think at least one of those arguments would have stuck, but Turing was like, nope, I've got more.
He was on a roll. He really seemed to relish tackling these big questions.
Oh, absolutely. And he had a knack for anticipating where people would push back. Like he was writing this paper with one eye on the future, almost like he could see the debates that are still raging today.
It's true. And he dives into this other category of objections, which he calls, and I love this, arguments from various disabilities.
Arguments from various disabilities. Okay. I'm intrigued.
It's basically all the things people claimed machines could never do, all those uniquely human qualities.
Okay, so like what kind of disabilities were people so sure machines would never overcome? Give me some examples.
Well, some people said machines could never be kind or resourceful.
That they could never truly be creative or make mistakes. Or even, appreciate beauty like a sunset or fall in love.
It's almost like they were defining humanity by making a list of everything a machine wasn't.
Yeah.
Like we're messy, emotional, flawed creatures, and somehow that's what makes us special.
So how did Turing respond to that whole line of thinking? Did he think machines were destined to be these cold, calculating automatons?
Not at all. Turing thought these objections, they were based on a really limited view of both machines and intelligence. He pointed out that people were judging machines based on the technology of their time, which, weren't exactly the most versatile things.
It's like looking at an abacus and assuming no machine could ever compose a symphony.
Exactly. He argued that as technology advanced, machines would become capable of things that seemed impossible at the time. He imagined machines with greater memory, faster processing speeds, more sophisticated programming. He even imagined machines that could learn and adapt on their own. And that right there, that sounds a lot like what we call machine learning today, right? Did Turing really predict that all the way back in
He
1950?
did. He even drew this parallel between machine learning and evolution, which I think is so fascinating.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So he saw the structure of a machine as kind of like hereditary material. Changes to its programming, those are like mutations.
Okay.
And the programmer was like the natural selector, guiding the machine's development. He believed that with the right approach, we could nurture machine intelligence, just like we nurture the development of a child.
It's mind-blowing to think he was already grappling with these ideas over 70 years ago. But even with all the advancements in AI, even with everything we can do with machines today, we still haven't definitively answered Turing's big question. Can machines think? And you know what? Turing, he never claimed to have the answer either. Instead, he gave us something even more powerful, a new way to think about thinking itself.
And that's really Turing's legacy, isn't it? He wasn't just trying to build a thinking machine. He wanted to understand what it means to think, to be intelligent, to be human in a world that was becoming increasingly shaped by our own creations.
He opened the door to a whole new realm of questions, and those questions are honestly more relevant today than ever. If a machine can convince us it's thinking, if it can mimic our creativity, our emotions, even our flaws, what does that say about us? What does it mean to be human in the age of intelligent machines?
And I think that's a question we're all going to be grappling with for a long time to come.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we're going to have to leave that question open for you all to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this incredible deep dive into Alan Turing's groundbreaking work. Until next time, keep asking those big questions.